And now goes out the third one, the least but not last, is a wonderful, wonderful presentation from Professor Burns. Professor Burns is a professor of clinical psychology, academic leads of the Center of Sport, Physical Education, and Activity Research, and at the Canterbury Christian Church University, CCCU, at UK. And she was the director of the Solomon's Institute for Applied Psychology, and also the head of the School of Psychology, Politics, and also Sociology. Professor Byrne has been a researcher focused on lives of people with an intellectual disability. Throughout her career, in the last decade, especially on sports, as a vehicle to increase the quality of life and opportunity for people with intellectual disability. And that's the thing, is the one thing I really, really expect Professor Byrne is. Professor Byrne worked an international team to develop a Paralympic classification process to re-allow athletes with an intellectual disability to compete in the Paralympic was achieved for the London 2012 game. Maybe most of us knows about the Paralympic in the past, only invite people with physical disability and also visual impairment. It's very difficult for us to have the rights to invite the athlete with intellectual disability. I believe that Professor Byrne did a great job on that. And also, this research received the Gold Award for exceptional research contribution to the Olympic and Paralympic Award by the Research Council UK. And Professor Burns was the features as a Paralympic scientist in nature. It's a wonderful, wonderful chance we be able to invite Professor Burns to present a wonderful topic for us. The topic of the presentation will be Make Room on Podium, the pathway to becoming an elite athlete with intellectual disability. Let's welcome Professor Burns.
A generous introduction. And I'm so pleased to have this invitation to the conference today. Sorry, I'm just seeing a sort of little message flash up on my computer here. Can you see my presentation okay?
It's okay. It's okay for us, yeah. Very clear. Crystal clear.
Okay. Great. Great. I was just getting an error thing keep flashing up on my computer. Great. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to come to the conference. Obviously, I'm really disappointed that we all can't be there together in person, but hopefully we'll have other opportunities to meet in the future. Also, thank you very much to the two previous presenters who've set a very sort of interesting and stimulating scenario for me to then hopefully add to. I'm going to talk about two particular exceptional aspects for a particular population. So I'm going to be talking about people with intellectual disabilities, but who are also exceptional because of their giftedness in their physical ability. So I just want to sort of get us in the space of thinking about elite sport by firstly, sorry, I just keep getting this error flashing up. It's not moving on. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing it and close a few windows down and start again because it's telling me I've got too many windows open. Sorry about this. There we go. I will try and share again. Okay, great. It's moving on. Just to get us in space, I've got a montage here of elite athletes, some of whom you should be familiar with. You know, Usain Bolt there is an international figure, Roger Federer, we've got various footballers, but I've also put some Paralympians in there as well. Some of you who may recognise Helena Crockford, for example, Lee Pearson, Ellie Simmons, swimmer. These are all people who've been absolutely elite international, national figures in their own sports, and have developed that sort of esteem and national recognition, international recognition. Just want to show you four athletes who you probably don't recognise. These are athletes all with intellectual disabilities. They are all Olympians, Paralympians, medal holders. They are world record breakers. Firstly, we've got Brianna Clark there from the US, who in the last Tokyo Games won gold for the 400 meters and broke the world record. We've got Reese there, who's a GB swimmer, who again won a gold medal and broke the world record for the 200-meter individual medley. And we have Paula Sanchez here from Ecuador, who won the first medal ever in the Paralympics for Ecuador. That was in the shot put. And for Ukraine, we had Maxim Koval, who again broke the world record, Paralympic record and world record for the shot put in men's sport. Now, these athletes probably didn't get the recognition that the same athletes without disabilities would have got in their own country, but in my world of elite sport, these are massive champions and massive representation of what people with individual intellectual disabilities can achieve. I'm going to return to these athletes in a moment because I want to look at particularly what they have achieved. But if we consider the population in the world with disabilities, there's about 6% of people in the world have disabilities. These are figures taken from the World Health Organization. When we think about Paralympians, often we're thinking about the very visible disabilities of people in wheelchairs, and that's about 1% of the world's population. We might also think about people who wear blades or other sorts of prosthetics to enable them to participate in sport. But we've got to remember that 2.6% of the world's population have intellectual disabilities. So that is a very large population, and it's a very large proportion of people with disabilities in the world. So in terms of their representation in elite sport, they're certainly not equally represented. If we just take the last Paralympics in Tokyo, 4,400 athletes competed in those games. Of those 4,400, only 160 of those athletes had intellectual disabilities. So in terms of space on this podium, athletes with intellectual disabilities occupy an unrepresented, a disproportional space. So that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about this issue today, about how we improve that space. One of the questions I often get asked is, well, why are people with intellectual disabilities actually in the Paralympics, not the Paralympics? So that's one of the things that I'll talk about straight away. And that came to me very closely when I was sat at the London Paralympics watching the swimming and watching some of our athletes compete there. And I just was sitting next to a member of the public, and I could hear her having this conversation with her friend saying, you know, why are these people here? They haven't got any amputations. I can't see any problem with them. What's the problem? And, you know, that is one of the questions that we continuously sort of face, because intellectual disabilities is not such visible, apart from obviously some people like people with Down syndrome, it's not such a visible disability. on that occasion, I obviously had a chance to jump in and explain a little bit, which was nice to be able to do. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the process, the pathway. How do athletes with intellectual disabilities get to compete at this standard? And the importance of this pathway. And finally, I want to sort of conclude with, why is it important? Why is it important to look at this pathway and look at these opportunities and look at how somebody can be, as we've just talked about in previous presentations, have double exceptions, can be exceptional in one way that's often seen as a negative, but also can be exceptional in a way that's seen as a very positive difference. So that's where I hope to get to by the end of the presentation. I just want to return to those 4 athletes and talk about why are these athletes competing in the Paralympics, not the Olympics. If we just look at the performance of these top athletes, so these are athletes who have had, particularly, I certainly know for the USA and I certainly know for the GB, top coaching, top opportunities, top contextual supports. The top of their careers, they are still not performing anywhere near the level of Olympic athletes in the same competitions, in the same events. You can see there for 400 meters there, we've got a difference of sort of 7.5 seconds between the Olympic world record and the world record for ID sport. And if you look across all of these results in all of the events that we compete in the Paralympics, we see a difference that usually ranges between 15% up to the maximum 45% difference in performance. So there's something happening. There's something that is associated with intellectual disabilities, which we usually consider, because of the terminology, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, mental disability, whatever we're going to call it, as something that's happening in the brain. But actually, there's something very clearly embodied in the physical performance that means that these people cannot reach the same standard of physical performance in sport that people without intellectual disabilities can reach. So why is that? And a lot of my research and the work that I've done with my team has been around trying to understand what that difference is. So it falls into sort of 3 main areas. Obviously the cognition side, the intellectual side, but also the physical health side, and then the life opportunities. So you put all these together and obviously they interact together to impact overall on sports performance. So let's have a little look at each of these. So the cognitive side, firstly, we did a lot of looking at sort of the types of intelligence that you need to perform well at sport. And we found that there's 2 specific types of intelligence that are involved in good performance in sport. The first we call generic sports intelligence, which means it doesn't matter what sport you play, these types of intellectual ability are needed. And they're pretty obvious ones. Reaction time. There's no sport that you play where you're not going to need good reaction time. You need to be able to have some good memory. You need to recognize patterns. You need to process information pretty quickly. You need to be able to discriminate between different stimuli, the types of things that you need to be attending to, and overall what we call executive functioning, which is sort of being able to put these all together at the right time, in the right place to make the right response. So a little bit like having a good dashboard or a good visual display. But then, obviously, with the different sports, there are different types of specific intelligence that are needed. So, for example, strategy is an important one. So if we think, I've got a picture of one of our greatest table tennis players there from Hong Kong. But if we look at a track event, for example, the easiest one is 400 meters. if you go off as fast, full effort, right as the gun goes off, your performance is going to go down. So you have to involve some strategy. You also need to know what the other athletes in your race are going to do or are doing in that race. So one of the common things is what we call impulse control. If somebody next to you, you know you're a good finisher, but somebody next to you goes off very, very quickly and you decide that you're going to chase them down, and then you run out of steam and you lose. So you need to understand the strategy. You might also need to understand tactics, for example. So with our table tennis players, you need to be able to do things like feign shots, disguise shots. If you know that somebody's got a very good forehand return, you might need to sort of say, well, I'm going to play to their backhand. So you need to do that sort of quite complex processing. Another example in some of the more endurance sports, like 1500 meter running or Nordic skiing, you need to be able to pace yourself, and you need to be able to understand that you need to go at this velocity over this period of time and then increase it by this percentage. And very good non-intellectually disabled athletes will be able to do that very perfectly. Our athletes find it very difficult to sort of reach a certain percentage of performance and then maintain that. They tend to go up and down a lot. Involved in all of that is some quite complex decision making and impulse control, as I mentioned earlier on. So depending on the sport, you need different types of intelligence. So that's where cognitively you can see having intellectual disabilities and certainly deficits in certain areas are going to impact upon sports performance. But we also know that with intelligence, if we perform any sort of intelligence test on somebody with intellectual disabilities or somebody generally, we will see a profile of strengths and weaknesses. So in our, say, best table tennis players, we know that they might not have very good comprehension skills, their verbal skills might not be very good, but for example, I know this table tennis player has incredibly good reaction time, good processing speed, and good memory. But overall, this person's IQ comes into the range of having an intellectual disability. So it's sort of looking beneath that general IQ and looking at the strengths and minuses. But even so, I say this person will have a great reaction time. Their reaction time compared to a world record holder without intellectual disabilities will still be lower. The second side is health. And we know that many people the majority of people with intellectual disabilities also have health issues, and health issues that are going to impact on sports performance. There's a very good study by the Scottish Observatory on Learning Disabilities, who, because it's in Scotland is quite a small country, they are to do full cohort studies. So they looked at the full cohort of people with intellectual disabilities in Scotland, and they looked at the number of physical health conditions. And physical health conditions as defined under the World Health Organization, ICD. And shockingly, you find that the average number of health conditions somebody has is 11. Right? Very, very few people have 0 or 1 or 2 health conditions. They found I think it was 99.4% of people with learning disabilities had some form of health condition. So when we're talking about people with intellectual disabilities, we're talking always about comorbidity. So we know that having certain health conditions, and these health conditions are respiratory, cardiac, muscle strength, all sorts of different things, which will impact on sports performance. So if you have intellectual disabilities, you're likely to have a physical problem which could impede your sports performance. And obviously I've put one of our excellent athletes from Special Olympics there who's got Down syndrome. Obviously people with Down syndrome and other sorts of genetic syndromes that have got very clear physical implications, characteristics, phenotypes with them, again, that's very clear. So you very rarely see somebody with Down syndrome coming through to absolute top elite level, because we know they've got low muscle tone, they've got joint hyperflexivity, they may have cardiac problems, all sorts of other associated problems. So we've got a big health impact here as well. The other side is in terms of sort of people's life opportunities, and I don't really need to stress this too much. The previous two speakers have talked about it, and I'm sure our audience is very familiar with the types of decreased opportunities, standards of living that people have, all of which impact on sports performance. If you haven't got anybody who's able or willing to take you to sports clubs, or you haven't got the money to pay for equipment, or people are just not even bringing that opportunity to your notice, then your chance to get onto that pathway is decreased, and your chance to maintain that pathway is decreased. So all of those things together add into an impairment that will impact on sports performance, and that's why we're always looking at the Paralympics, not Olympics. We're talking about sport, high performance sport, but about this is there's a very wide funnel. Yes, we might be talking about a very small number of people at that end point that can get into the Paralympics, but along the way we're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions actually, when you look at Special Olympics, who are touching about 8 million people across the world now. An enormous number of people who might not reach the high performance level, who actually are very happy playing sport at a recreational level, or people who have highly performed, and you know, all of us who've played sport, as you get older, we get more recreational, competitive. All of those people are engaged in that pathway, and so it's not just talking about the elite level, because when we're talking about the elite level, we're talking about opening opportunities right at the recreational level for as many people as possible. So I just want to introduce you to a number of organisations that help people in this area. The one that most people are familiar with is Special Olympics. Most countries have got Special Olympics organisations today, and the philosophy of Special Olympics is very much about inclusion, and they have an inclusive sports program which also includes people without disabilities, and that's really about community engagement, recreational sport. It's not about high-level sport, but you know, equally we have some very intense competitions. We have regional competitions, world competitions. It's a fantastic organisation. Moving more to the sort of elite side, and the organisation that I've been working with quite strongly in the last few years is an organisation called Virtus, which is World Intellectual Impairment Sport, and we represent athletes with intellectual impairments and also athletes with autism, and there we're trying to put on national, regional, global competitions for athletes who are wanting to compete under the regular rules for the sports. You have very adapted rules in special education, but in Virtus we always apply the International Federation rules, and that is the sort of starting pathway if you want to get into sort of Paralympic competition. So I've just put the sort of the signal for Paralympic GB up there, but every nation who is a member of the Paralympics will have their own National Paralympic Association. And what you find is we might find an athlete who's been spotted through the Special Olympics, talent spotted, as having very good abilities. They get recommended to Virtus. Virtus has 86 member organisations in different countries across the world. They come into Virtus, they compete under the Virtus flag. They then might come to the notice of their National Paralympic Association and compete under that banner, which might get them eventually to the Paralympics. But you know, that the Paralympics is icing on the cake. It's really trying to get people into sport at any point down this pathway is really important.
Excuse me, Professor Burns, we only have about 3 minutes left for this section.
Okay, really fast
Okay.
then. I shall
Thank you.
skip on. Yeah. Just about models of inclusion. We just completed a very large study in Europe looking at sort of, well, should we be trying to put people in mainstream? Should we put them in disability organisations, inclusive organisations like the Unified Sports, or very specific organisations? The answer to that is very simple. There is no one model. Mixed economy works really well. People have different needs at different times. So there's no one way of doing this. Okay, I won't go through all that. Right. Why is it so important to look at this area and open sporting opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities? An obvious one, which I've not even put on this slide, is obviously it improves people's health. And we need to improve people's health in intellectual disabilities. But it's also about transformative individual skills. Team playing, discipline, all sorts of skills that will lead into things like employment, so increased life opportunities. It challenges people's attitudes about what intellectual disabilities actually are, just within our own professional area, but also public. It also provides inspiring role models for other people with intellectual disabilities. To see these people on these podiums, on the international stage, on the television, is fantastic. All of which is going to lead to inclusion. I just want to end with one athlete that I want to talk about very briefly, just to show you what this means for one person. I want to introduce Lenin. Lenin is a track and field athlete from Portugal. When I first met him, he comes from a very small village in Portugal, and he was talent spotted by his local athletics club. He went on to compete on Divertus, won many gold medals. He did so well, he became a Paralympian athlete. He's one of the few Paralympian athletes to actually get sponsorship. So he's actually earning an income from his athletic profession. He's now coming towards the end of his career, so he's moving into coaching and developing some very good opportunities and paid employment as a coach. And also within Portugal, he's become a little bit of an icon. He's become quite a celebrity. This is from a photo shoot for GQ magazine, which is a very popular men's magazine, where he featured on the front cover. So for his life, that one opportunity of getting into sport, being talent spotted, being supported, coached through, and the work that he's now doing to encourage other athletes with intellectual disabilities is absolutely incredible. So I just wanted to end with that one personal story, because that's the sort of inspiring stories that we want to create through working in this area. So I hope I've not gone too much over time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for Professor Burns and trying to summarize so many good things into the end of this presentation, and also she give us a very good example about just like a good figure, and also another case in UK, and remind us cognition, physical health, and also life activity may be the lack. We need to provide more these factors to people with intellectual disability and make a room on the podium for them. Okay, this is our section. 3 presenters. I'm so sorry that we don't have enough time for all the audience inside and also online to on-site and online to propose to ask any questions. And because of time limitation, and also we need to really rush into the next section. So that's the end of this section. Let's give a big pause to 3 presenters. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Burns and Professor Park, and also Professor Sang Ni. Say thank you. Thank you very much.